time, then our committee assistant, Sorsha, will actually take you out of the meeting. So you will not be able to finish your testimony. So I just ask everyone to be respectful of the fact that there are a lot of people who want to speak, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. I don't want to cut anyone off. It's really just a matter of that fact that we have a lot of people to get through today, and we want to hear from everyone. So I will be announcing who will be the person who is speaking and then who is on deck, so that you can get ready to give your comments, knowing that you're going to be the next person. I want to apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's names. I know that is not polite, and I'm sorry. I have a lot of names in front of me, and I will do my very best. I also just want to mention that at least one member of the task force has to leave to be at another commitment. So if you see someone leaving the task force, it's not because they're being rude, it's because they are, we all have multiple commitments going on right now, and we're trying to balance a lot of things. So with that, are there any questions or comments from the task force before we start? All right. Yes, that's a great idea. So we'll start with everyone introducing ourselves. As I said, I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I represent the Addison district.
Senator Cheryl Hooker from Rutland.
Senator Randy Brock, Franklin.
Senator Andrew Pertzlick, Washington County.
Representative Emily Kornheiser, Brattleboro.
Representative Scott Beck, St. Johnsbury.
Representative Peter Conlon, Cornwall.
Representative Kathleen James, Manchester.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So the first person on the list, it will be Kathy Salsa, and the second person on deck is Kathy Olwell. So Ms. Salsa, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kathy Salsa, and I'm a resident of Rutland City, a member of the Rutland City Public School Board, and a member of the Coalition for Vermont Student Equity. This is an incredibly important piece of legislation to my community. We've been underfunded for decades while still trying to meet state mandates and provide necessary programs to meet our students' needs. The inequity in Vermont's educational funding system is something that we in Rutland City have recognized and lived with for decades. Inequity has grown and become more burdensome with every year as overall wealth disparities have increased. The number of economically disadvantaged and oftentimes traumatized students make up a significant portion of our enrollment. The true cost of meeting our students' needs exceeds the current weighting system. Now, finally, a study commissioned by the legislature and conducted by experts illuminated the problem with indisputable data, and it offers a data-driven solution with specific weighting recommendations to remedy funding disparities. With this new system, we'd be able to provide our students with the support they need, no matter their economic status or where they were born, to reach their potential and become responsible, engaged citizens. We no longer would worry about passing an increased budget to an already highly taxed property owners or taking money from the Gen Ed fund. It's so disheartening to watch this effort to humanize our educational funding system begin to disintegrate with the proposal to pull ELL weights out of the formula and use categorical grants instead. Why is the task force questioning what these scholars and scientists advise? It's specifically stated in the report that the formula needs to be taken as a whole. Primary to the study's focus was economically disadvantaged students, ELL students, and secondary level students. Remove one weight and it affects all the other factors. To remove ELL students from the equation is to change the outcome. I assert that the task force doesn't have the background that matches the experts who developed the new weights. Additionally, the task force does not appear to have any empirical data driving the 25,000 plus 5,000 proposal, and the proposal does nothing to address the underlying issue of pupil weighting inequity. It is fair to say that categorical aid will continue to support the framework of racism, classism, and systemic inequity on many levels. The task force is running simulations of what funding would look like with ELL categorical grants and current data. As responsible legislators, we must also model what the funding would look like following the study's recommendations. In the name of transparency, you need to use simulation B1 to show the weights based on current school level data and share the results so this essential information can be part of the public dialogue. In Vermont, our system of funding education is not equitable. This is not the question. The question is, how will we address the issues brought to light in the study? To apply categorical aid is to keep the blinders on and deny the inherent classism and racism that result from our educational funding policies. We will all win if we have a system where every student gets what they need to become a successful and engaged member of their community. Please
Thank
support implementing a new weighting system as recommended. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Salsa. Next up is Kathy Olwell, and on deck is Richard Werner. Ms. Olwell, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
name-
go ahead.
Okay, my name is Kathy Olwell. I am a Burlington school commissioner and a retired social worker who spent 25 years working with middle school youth. I was hopeful when the weighting study was initiated and hopeful that it would show what we knew was happening for the past 20 plus years, and it did. The legislature commissioned UVM, Rutgers, and American Institute of Educational Research to conduct the pupil weighting factors report that has been praised by educational, scientific, and mathematical institutions as one of the most equitable education weighting studies done to date in the US. We, the taxpayers, paid for the study because AOE and JFO did not have the personnel to research and model the weighting formula. However, last week, the task force stated to the coalition that the reason the categorical aid modeling is taking so long to finish is because AOE and JFO have lost personnel and new staff needing to be trained. This does not sound reassuring to me, and I do not understand why a completed, scientifically credible study is being set aside for an unfinished and unvetted study. That's not how good science nor good government works. You do not design a study for the answers you want, nor do you take out a portion of the population based on class or race when you are trying to find an equitable solution. This is what I would call racism, not science nor government looking for equity. It is imperative that you show the categorical aid proposal as well as the updated modeling of the report's recommendations. If you refute the weighting factor report, the full legislature must fully understand what it is you are refuting and why. Additionally, you should provide the legislature with an updated data simulation of both simulation B1 of the weighting factors report and categorical aid simulation of the so that the comparisons are accurate and the work is transparent. I hope that you find the civil courage to make the politically difficult choice before you. Please do not play politics with the education and future of Vermont's impoverished and ELL children. They are depending on each one of you to right this inequitable wrong that has burdened education for the past 20 years. Prove to the children of this state that Vermont does what is equitable and right, even when it may be difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olwell. Next up is Richard Werner, and following Richard is Karen Larson. Mr. Werner, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Senator Hardy, and thank you for senators and representatives that are allowing me to address your committee tonight or today. I know you all been very busy and working hard on your charge report back to the legislature. This committee has the ability to recommend corrections to Act 60 and 68 that have been festering for over 20 years in proper weighting of students throughout the state. This has caused many districts to put off many needed building repairs, reduce programs, just to keep the ask of its communities at a level that will not bankrupt their towns. I've been a member of the Dover School Board since 1995 and chairman since 1996 until it ceased to exist. I currently serve as the chairman of the River Valley School District, of which I've served in that position since its inception. And I also serve currently as the chairman of the Wyndham Central Supervisory Union, from which I have for approximately past 20 years over 2 different terms. This experience has offered me a unique perspective of education funding in Vermont, from pre-Act 60 through Act 68 from both the perspective of giving and receiving schools in our district. I've also become very knowledgeable on Act 60 funding, having spent numerous hours talking to both Brad, James, and formerly Bill Talbot at the finance. I was able to access many of the financial tools supplied to the business managers, as in Dover, we did not access ourselves to the SU supervisory business manager. The school district would many times postpone votes on our budget until May, so as to allow our budget for the to give the maximum utilization of funds for the betterment of our students. In the early days of Act 60, the legislature recognized that small and rural schools had additional challenges, as well as students from high poverty areas and English language learners. To correct this, there were several adjustments made, some through weighting and some through grants. A couple of years after the original weighting, the weights were adjusted, and since then they seem to become stagnant. Many of the grants, though, change over time. It seems that most of the time they are reduced, with the reductions being announced late in the legislative season, usually after many schools have already set their budget. One example is a transportation grant, which started life as 50% of the budgeted transportation expenses. Then it became 50% of the previous year's reported expenses, and now it's some number well under 50% of the previous years. However, over the year, with the weights being stagnant and the changes in education, our communities, in the world in general, it's become quite apparent that the smaller rural, high poverty areas are being severely underfunded. This was made quite apparent with the study commissioned by our legislature that resulted in the formation of this committee. Although the town of Dover will actually be adversely affected when these weights are adjusted, it's important these changes are made, as it affects our most vulnerable students in our rural schools, which make up a large percentage of our students. I asked the committee recommend that the weights be changed as recommended in the request.
Thank you, Mr. Werner.
Sorry.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Larson, are you there?
I
And
am.
Deck, it's
Although,
Erica.
apologies, I think I need to keep my camera off, just in that our internet connection is a little unstable up here in the wilds of Cabot. So I hope you will forgive just the audio, if that's all right. Can you hear me okay?
That is fine. If audio works, and if for the next people, if you can turn your video on, please do so. But if you can't because of your internet or other reasons, that is fine too. So Karen Larson will go, and then on deck is Erika Fuccello. Go ahead, Ms. Larson. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time and allowing us to address this board. As a parent in Vermont, I'm a member of the school board or a research group or a social group that didn't offer you some lections about
Ms. Larson, I'm sorry, we're having a really hard.
funding. Encourage this body to
Ms. Larson?
examine and redress funding for the.
Ms. Larson, I'm sorry, we are having a really hard time
Yes.
understanding you because of the
Can you
internet
hear now?
connection.
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, we are not
Can you hear me a little bit better now?
a little bit. You want to try again?
Sure.
And if
Sure,
we're
I'll
not
try
able to get it, you can
again.
certainly submit your testimony in writing. But
Okay.
go ahead and try
perfect.
again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I just wanted to express
I'm
some
sorry, Ms.
gratitude to the
Larson.
committee for allowing.
I'm sorry, we're not able
okay.
to hear you sufficiently when we want to make sure we understand what you're saying. So would you be able to submit your testimony in writing, please? And we
I would.
I'm sorry about the technology issues. If you send it to Sorsha, she can provide it to the full task force. Thank you.
I will
for
do
your
that. Thank
be here
you
today.
so much.
Next on the list is Erika Fuccello. And
Hi.
after Erika is Martine Gulick. And Erika, if you're able to put your video on, it's nice for us to be able to see you, but if you can't, we understand. But why don't you go ahead and identify yourself?
I can
and
try. I'm also in Cabot and our internet is
Oh.
sketchy.
Then no, never mind. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me okay though?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let's just go ahead at what we've got. I am woefully not prepared with all these different numbers that everyone has. I am only here as a parent. My husband and I built our house in Cabot because of the programs that were offered for elementary age students, and because of the small school. We wanted our kids to have that one-on-one, that small school setting. I grew up here, and I had larger classrooms, and although I did well, my two sisters didn't do as well, and we wanted to have all of our kids, we have 4 by the way, have the opportunities that a small school provided. As soon as we built our house the following year, we unfortunately lost a lot of our programs because we were not able to provide we weren't able to meet those state expectations for our budgetary needs, and so we lost our elementary music and a lot of other things that we were proud of having. We fought back hard. It's been a struggle, but small schools are the backbone of Vermont. Our agricultural industry depends on these small villages supporting our students. And you know, one thing you hear is always that, oh, Vermont has an aging population. We need to bring in younger families. The way to do that is to support our students, to provide a system. We have a shockingly neurodiverse school that kids require, you know, they have different needs. And we need to support them, because not only do we have people who learn better one-on-one, they do project-based learning. It's exceptional, the kind of educators that we have, the kind of education that our children are getting, but we continue to support that. We've been hard, and if we are unable to come up with a better solution, we're going to lose a lot of the pull. We're going to lose people that have to move to bigger areas, bigger cities to give their kids the education that they need, and to neglect our neurodiverse students and to neglect the neurotypical students is just kind of shooting ourselves in the foot as far as Vermonters go. That's all I really have, is just as a parent, support our small schools and do better for them, because it's really hard in a small area.
Thank you, Ms. Fuccello. And if you would, oh, I'm sorry.
Parents watching our education state's requirements and do well. That's fine.
Thank you so much. And if you would like to submit your testimony in writing, that would be helpful, because you come in and out a little bit.
Sure.
So if you would like to do that, so we make sure we get every word that you wanted us to hear, that would be great. And thank you for your time today. Next up is Martine Gulick, and after Martine is David Kelly. Go ahead, Ms. Gulick.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martine Larocque Gulick. I'm a school commissioner in Burlington and a member of the Coalition for Vermont Student Equity. Thank you again for the time you spent on this task force. And I also want to acknowledge the challenge of discussing change and reform when we're in such unusual times. Schools are under strain, students are struggling, and there are large staffing shortages, as you know. It's not business as usual. However, I urge you to also consider that these hardships are felt to an even greater degree in underweighted districts. I've heard some school leaders say that if the weights are implemented as suggested in the study, it will be catastrophic. This simply is not true. Yes, there will be adjustments. Districts might need to tighten their belts, but it will not be a catastrophe. Thus far, we've only talked about 2 options for overweighted districts if implementation goes through: cut programming or raise taxes. The truth is, there is a third option: cut some of the excess. I have seen bloated athletic budgets, top-heavy administrations, extra office staff, and deep IT departments. I've seen that with more funding, you can pay more and it's easier to retain staff. The bottom line is that underweighted districts have too few staff and have for decades. This leads to instability, high turnover, and a lack of robust systems, which can sometimes manifest as a culture in crisis. Overweighted districts have the luxury of paying their staff more and creating a more comfortable job environment, which leads to greater stability and a culture that at least appears high-functioning, goal-driven, and cohesive. These disparities ultimately lead to vast differences in outcomes. But we can adequately support those who need our backing the most. It's the right thing to do for children, and I would argue it's the right thing to do for Vermont and will ultimately benefit everyone. My children went through the Burlington School District, and I had the means to pay for shortcomings that I saw in resources or in staffing. But way too often I saw new American students and students living in poverty try to navigate the system without adequate support, often without success. You may think I'm straying off topic, but the bottom line is that this is big and it's complex and it plays out in many, many ways. We are starting our own equitable budget process in Burlington. And I have to tell you that when we did a survey of our staff, over 70% of our staff said that they would be willing to take less so that the students who need it the most could get the resources that they require. So possibly all of Vermont would be able to understand that if we did implement the study. Thank you again. I know I'm running out of time. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Gulick. Next up is David Kelly. David, are you here? Great. If you could come up to the table in person, and following Mr. Kelly is John Stroup. You're on deck.
Hello, my name is Dave Kelly. I'm a former chief.
If you could be at the table and the microphone so everyone can hear you, that would be great.
I'm ready.
Go ahead.
My name is Dave Kelly. I'm the former chair of the Hazen Union School Board. For 20 years, I've coached high school debate, first at South Burlington High School and then later at Hazen Union High School. I've met great students at both, great teachers and great students at both schools. But I think it's important that this legislature understand the differences between these schools that I've gotten to know very well. Briefly, here are some key numbers. At Hazen Union, the average teacher salary is $56,652. At South Burlington, the average teacher salary is $80,294. In Hardwick, Hazen's largest town, 17.6% of the families live below the poverty line. In South Burlington, 6.63% of the families live below the poverty line. 1 out of 5 students at Hazen requires special ed services. 1 out of 10 students at South Burlington requires a similar service. Hazen spends $23,527 per special needs student. South Burlington spends $32,317. These numbers have classroom consequences. At Hazen, they are manifested in greater classroom management challenges, reduced learning opportunities, and increased teacher burnout. One of Vermont's most respected superintendents told me recently, there are times when the needs are so great they can create a deficit mentality and lower expectations. It takes extraordinary principals, staff, and teachers to transcend the weight of these needs, to sustain the responsibility to set high expectations, and to advance all learners. A budget crisis at some schools means cutting robotics programs. At Hazen and other schools in the Northeast Kingdom I'm familiar with, it means cutting a behavioral specialist, homeschool coordinators, or school-based clinicians. The funding formula needs to change, and it needs to be based on pure weighting, not categorical aid. As just one example, the way small schools grants are treated by Act 46 have made a mockery of categorical aid programs. They are not trusted by schools or communities or school boards. Act 173 likewise cannot be implemented unless, except in conjunction with meaningful weighting, and even then its ramifications need to be carefully monitored and adjusted. A block grant based on census is inadequate to meet the needs of districts with high percentages of special needs. The impact of those needs are as crushing as the impacts of poverty. There is today irrefutable evidence that we are violating the Common Benefits Clause of the Vermont Constitution, and that cannot and should not continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Next is John Stroup, and after Mr. Stroup is Mark Clough. Mr. Stroup, are you there? Yep.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead with your testimony.
Great, thank you. Hello, my name is John Stroup, and I am the chair of the school board of the Addison Northwest School District. I live in Virgins. I'm also on the faculty here at Champlain College in the education department. I'm talking here to you about what the impact will be of the weighting study changes on our district. I think it is really important to say at the start that we're sympathetic to the goals of the work that you're doing on this task force. And we find it really important that all students, that you ensure that all students, public school students, have equitable access to educational opportunities. And that's what I would like to focus my talk on. If the weighting study is implemented as it stands, it would do tremendous damage to my school district. We estimate that if the weighting study was implemented as it was written, that we would see a 20% tax increase on a level funded budget. We would lose more than $1 million in revenue and with a loss of about 59 students. And a lot of people would say, well, tighten your belt. You can do more with less. And I will tell you that we already are bare bones in our education. This is not extravagant education in Virginia and nearly in Addison County. It's already quite expensive. We go up against the threshold nearly every year. We struggle to keep programs. We did a study of our programs and compared them with some schools that were nearly the same size as ours, and found that we, except for just a couple of programs, we really were not providing the opportunities that our students needed. All you have to do is pick up a paper in Addison County and see that we are in crisis. Communities are fighting to keep their schools open. We have ourselves put together a merger study with another school district to see if we can fight off and keep programs for our kids while keeping taxes low. If you implement the weighting study as is, I believe it will pour gasoline on a fire that is already raging. Please continue to wait and study and learn about the unintended consequences that might occur for smaller districts like ours, who really may be negatively impacted by the weighting changes. I'll ask you to continue your focus on ensuring that public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities, and keep opportunities, not taxes, at the forefront of your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stroup. Next up is Mark Clough. You're here in person, and after Mark is Pamela Reed. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Mark Clough. I am chair of the Peacham School Board, vice chair of the Caledonia Central Supervisory Union, and on the Vermont School Boards Association board. I guess I'm going to personalize a little bit the rurality and small rural school situation and not be as global. We in Peacham have a long history of education with a K-12 academy that was in until the 70s and the oldest library in the state. We are currently operating a pre-K to 6 elementary school, recognizing the resources required in these times need to be provided by larger institutions for the later grades. So we have chosen to provide a strong base for developing learning skills and a good public school for the students' primary futures, and then tuitioning out for the 7 to 12 grades. We are in a very rural area of the state, far away from many services, and we want to maintain a public school. We want to maintain that school both for the future of our community and for the well-being of the students. We get hit each year with the excess spending threshold, despite tuitioning out over half our students each year, despite actively growing our student census, of which we've had some luck, but we are getting penalized for our rurality and small school size. Our town is 650 population strong with 62 students in our K-6 and the other 60 being tuitioned out 7 to 12, as I've indicated. Our population density is low, but the school has been a very important factor for the town. And we have excellent leadership in that school, and we're creating very high test scores and we believe comprehensive learning skills for these students. I would ask to not discount the reality and population density weighting factors, and keep in mind all the small towns in the state and the challenges we face in continuing to provide good public education for our younger population. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clough. Next is Pamela Reed, and after Pamela is Scott Salway. Ms. Reed, are you there?
I am.
Great. Thank you. You may go ahead.
Okay, thanks. My name is Pam Reed. I am a lifelong resident of Rutland and currently serve as the Director of Support Services, Equity and Inclusion for Rutland City Public Schools. I am joining you today to assert my support for the implementation of pupil weights as described by the University of Vermont in their evaluation of the census-based special education block grant. The census-based approach to the funding of special education outlined in Act 173 assumes that the incidence of students with disabilities and the extent of their need is the same across school districts. It does not account for the population-based differences that impact the frequency and intensity of our communities. The census-based system will result in higher taxes in towns and cities that have more students with disabilities and/or greater need, which will lead to an inequitable system and educational opportunities for our children. Data has long substantiated the correlation between the rate of poverty and the identification of disability. In 2019, the United States Census Bureau found that children living in poverty were more likely to have a disability at a rate of 6.5% in comparison to children who live above the poverty threshold, which is only 3.8%. Further, according to that 2019 data, 25.9% of people with disabilities were living in poverty, while just 11.4% of people without disabilities were living in poverty. The researchers at the University of Vermont also noted the correlation between the extent of economic disadvantage in a school district and the percentage of children with disabilities in their evaluation of the census-based special education block grant. We must find a way to accommodate for this correlation in our funding system. Calculating the census grant using pupil weights allows for the rate of poverty and therefore disability to implicitly be accounted for. It maintains the census-based funding approach and retains predictability and transparency. Additionally, it's straightforward to administer. Most of all, applying the pupil weighting factors will generate sufficient revenue for communities with higher levels of need, communities like mine. I believe that you all want what's best for Vermont children. I also believe that equal and equity are two very different terms. Equal means everyone gets the same. Equity means everyone gets what they need. The census-based block grant for special education funding provides an equal amount of funding per student, whereas applying the pupil weights provides an equitable amount, helping all children get what they need. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Reed. Next up is Scott Salway. And after Scott, we're going to go back to Karen Larson, who has moved to a new location so she can be with us. So Mr. Salway, are you there?
Yes.
Thank you. Great. You may go ahead.
Why do you serve? My name is Scott Salway. I'm a resident of Dover, Vermont, a father of two amazing children, ages 2 and 6, an involved community member, and a former 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher for 12 years here in Southern Vermont. As I pondered about what I could say that would really make a difference, I thought about sharing the facts, the numbers, the data. As I always told my students, support your position with evidence. But sorry, everyone, we're going to go a little off script here. Because you have the data, you have the numbers, you've read it, you've heard it, you've seen the study, and it's clear. The current weighting system is not fair. As a teacher in an underprivileged rural school, I lived this discrepancy. I saw how underprivileged students in rural schools lacked the resources they needed to succeed. So in this short time, I want to ask our members of Congress a question. Why do you serve? I would assume it's not only to represent your constituency, but to improve all of Vermont. The playing field isn't level. An improved equity in education will will aid our economy and our potential workforce. And if there's ever a time to address our future workforce, well, just ask a business owner. Our current weighting system adds funding barriers to learning to those who need no more barriers. The promise of Brigham has not happened. In fact, as the legislature's weighting study conducted by UVM has shown that the inequities have shifted. Fair is not always equal. When students come from poverty, from a language barrier, education can be their opportunity for prosperity, and to do anything short of knocking barriers down for them should be quickly amended. We're talking about an act put in place almost 25 years ago that many would argue had good intentions, but was flawed to begin with. The pupil weighting study shed light on this, that according to Secretary of Education Daniel Friend, therein lies a simple premise. Different types of students cost more to educate. He told Senate lawmakers this, that we don't follow this simple premise. To be specific, I'm urging you to advocate adopting the changes recommended in the expert study that would adjust the weights at the school level, not the district level, even if they will be administered at the district level. I see fairness for kids at the local level, not changes that are generalized across the entire district. As a teacher, I always wanted what was best for my students, but I always thought about the whole school and what was best for the school. As a member of Congress, I'm asking you to do the same. In closing, let me ask you one more time. Why do you serve? The current equalized formula needs adjusting. Your Secretary of Education has stated it. The study has shown it. I've lived it. Now, please ask yourself, why do I serve? Thank you.
Salway. Thank you.
Thank
And now
you.
we're going to go back. Thank you. To Ms. Larson. Ms. Larson, are you there? I hear you've gone to the library, so you might have better internet service.
I have actually. Thank you so much. I'm actually sitting in the Lister's office below the library.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, it takes a village, right? So yeah,
Yay for local government. Go ahead with your testimony.
that's right. Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing us to all sit in and offer some reflections on this really important subject. I came down because I know that my co-parent Erika, another parent in the community, was having similar tech troubles. So thank you again for allowing us to address this body. I'm coming to you today not as a school board member or an educator particularly, but as a parent in a small community, in Cabot in particular, with a reflection on the current funding formula that sadly does not recognize or account for the needs of students or schools who are operating in high poverty, high needs, and rural areas. And change is needed, and I'm both grateful and affirmed that the legislature is looking at addressing this issue in substantive ways. Here in Cabot, we are required, as any community is, both in ethical terms and by law, to serve our special needs students. And Cabot does this well. We're proud of that fact, and our community is known for it. In fact, we attract families who know that their children will be seen in our excellent small school and who will be served by a team of high quality educators and practitioners. We are additionally proud that the Department of Children and Family Services actively places high trauma children in foster homes in Cabot, in part because of the excellence of our school and the services that we provide. So here's just a personal anecdote. One of my neighbors, they're a gorgeous family. They live in an antique farmhouse, beautiful gardens. They have 5 high needs foster children around their dinner table this evening. They're not unusual. We are a community that welcomes and loves and educates all of our children. The reality of that love, however, comes up hard against finance. The state provides, of course, some reimbursement for special needs students, but it is well below what is required by law to meet the needs of this population. So a few figures: Cabot has 10% of the students' district population and accounts for 17% of the district's state mandated special ed expenses. Last year, 23% of our enrolled student body was on an IEP. We're also a poor district. 53% of our families qualify for free and reduced lunch. This last figure reflects the community as a whole. We're proud. It's a beautiful, vibrant place to live, but we do not have the resources or tax bases that are enjoyed by other more prosperous communities. Special education costs have risen every year for the last 6 years, and in most recent years, special education costs have approached nearly 35% of the Cabot's entire school budget. With a lack of appropriate reimbursement for Montpelier, rising tax rates held afloat by people who struggle to afford basics are the results. And if that wasn't bad enough, the excess spending penalty threshold has been particularly cruel in places like Cabot that are poor, that are rural, and that serve a disproportionately high needs population. We are not supported, but are rather penalized for doing the right thing, helping the neediest of children when our per pupil costs exceed a metric that seems almost arbitrary when considering the reality of education. And the budget process these last years has been brutal. Okay, well, thank you so much. I just wanted to offer you a little bit of a snapshot of what is happening here. Thank you for addressing this issue.
Thank you. And thank you for accommodating us by going to another location. Again, you can submit it, the full testimony via on written testimony. Next up is Elaine Collins. I'm sorry I didn't give you an on deck notice, but Ms. Collins, are you there? Great. And after Ms. Collins is Kate McLaughlin. So go ahead, Ms. Collins.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. As you said, my name is Elaine Collins. I'm a lifelong Northeast Kingdom girl. I have lived here my whole life, and thankfully my 6 grown children and 6 grandchildren are also Vermonters and live close by. Working in Vermont schools has been and continues to be my life's work. This is my 6th year as the principal at Newport City Elementary School, my 11th year as a school principal, and my 32nd year working in Vermont schools. In my school, in the northern part of the state, of the 330 students in my pre-K to 6 school, nearly 80% of them live in poverty, and almost 30% of them qualify for an IEP or 504. I want to speak to you about the validity of the conclusions of the weighting study and how that plays out in my school so that you might consider what are the next best steps in your work. In my 32 years of working in Vermont schools, the work has changed. Poverty, drug addiction, trauma, they're all creating pressure on schools and making our work more complex. Even before the pandemic, we had an alarming number of students who were experiencing housing insecurities, food insecurities, mental health crises, trauma, challenges with emotional regulation, and behavioral challenges. Now that COVID continues to be a problem for us, these issues have been compounded for our students. If we don't meet the social emotional needs that our students come to us with, no one is able to learn. When I started at Newport City 6 years ago, our school was in crisis. During my tenure, we have built a strong support system for students to support their social and emotional health and well-being. Before building and implementing these more cohesive and comprehensive supports for our students, in one school year of 175 days, we had 890 escorts, seclusions, and restraints. I'm going to say that number again, 890. Sit with that for a minute. Nobody is learning when that is happening in a school environment. With adding these needed supports in our system, last year that number was 44. The work that we're doing to build resilience in our students is making a real difference, not only in the lives of our students, but in our family and in our community. But there are significant costs associated with this work. Positions like 2 guidance counselors, 2 school-based clinicians, 2 nurses, 7 special ed teachers, speech language pathology, 2 home to school coordinators, a social emotional learning coach. These were all positions that were unheard of 32 years ago, or even 20 years ago, but are absolutely essential now in order to allow access for our neediest students. Currently, those costs are on the backs of the residents of our community. I would ask you to consider the work that we're doing and the costs associated with it when you are thinking about the implications of the weighting study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Collins. Next is Kate McLaughlin, and after Kate is Cassandra Frazier. Ms. McLaughlin, you're there? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Kate McLaughlin. I live in Burlington. I have 2 children, both of whom have attended Burlington schools since kindergarten. One's now in college and the other is a sophomore at Burlington High School. I'm here today to testify because of my growing concern about what will be done with the education funding. I'm asking you to update our educational funding formula as is recommended by the 2019 UVM Rutgers report. This report, which was commissioned by the legislature, makes clear recommendations on how to fix the inequities in our current system. You ask experts to make recommendations, and yet somehow we're still talking about alternatives. The UVM Rutgers report has laid out ways that Vermont can make our education system more equitable, a way that can support districts that have been underweighted for the past 20 years. I urge the legislature to look to the future and to do what is right to create a system that is reliable and sustainable for schools all over Vermont. I believe, and I think we can probably all agree, that education is a foundation for a successful small d democracy. All children deserve access to equitable education opportunities, regardless of their family's income, their first language, the size of their school, or where they live. By separating out certain types of learners, a separate system will be created, one that puts additional administrative burden on schools already challenged to do their best. We've heard a lot in the past couple weeks about how schools are challenged in Vermont, and we need to work to support them with clarity and predictability. As I said, we live in Burlington, and Burlington might be a little different from many of the other schools districts that you've been hearing about today. I find it exciting and unique in its diversity here in Vermont. We've made a choice to stay in Burlington and support the Burlington schools. But our experiences of talking with families outside of our district can repeatedly highlight inequities and gaps between the districts. We watch with worry as parents with means talk about moving to other districts with more resources for their schools. It doesn't feel fair, and it feels worrisome. It's happening around the state. I think our district is the future, and we need to ensure that it is resourced appropriately. We need to be certain that we are creating a system that will support changing demographics in a predictable way. Please remember, the underweighted districts are our most diverse, our most rural, and our poorest. I've heard comments that this change will damage schools that are currently overweighted. I ask you, what damage has been done to the schools over the past 20 years that have been underweighted? The current alternative task force proposal, rooted in politics, weighs the wants of the privileged over the needs of those with less privilege. Please do the right thing, and we'll look to the study to guide your decisions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Next is Cassandra Frazier, and after Cassandra is Allison Knott. Go ahead, Ms. Frazier. Thank you.
Of course. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Cassie Frazier. I am the Director of Marketing for the Abbey Group, which is a food service management company headquartered out of Sheldon, Vermont, and we feed many of the schools across our state. And I thank you today for the opportunity to testify. I'm strongly encouraging that the task force recommend to the legislature a requirement for the universal school meals in order to achieve equity among our students, regardless of the pupil weighting process. In addition to the recommendation of universal school meals, I'm also encouraging the task force to recommend the adoption of statewide use of the household income form to collect the information necessary to implement the weighting, again, regardless of how that formulation comes to be. I joined the Abbey Group during the onset of the pandemic and have seen how universal school meals have leveled the playing field for all of our students for the remainder of the 2020 school year, as well as this year. The big difference we are seeing this year is that many parents believe that they have to fill out the free and reduced meal application for their children to be eligible for free meals. And due to the optional nature of that form, they do not complete it. This is where Vermont's children would highly benefit from the mandatory use of the household income form to collect that vital information. We could easily eliminate the currently optional and frankly confusing free and reduced form in favor of the household income form, so that all parents are not required to fill out any additional paperwork for all of their students to receive free meals and for the purpose of collecting data in order for this to be achieved. We have also established knowledge of the importance of consistent, high-quality nutrition's impact on a child's ability to learn. When schools had to pivot to remote learning in the spring of 2020, food service teams, teachers, support staff, volunteers all pitched in to keep all of our children's access to food constant because of its known importance. It is our responsibility to create the conditions necessary for learning and making sure that our kids aren't distracted by rumbling stomachs, and this is paramount to doing so. The pandemic has strained our state's families, and many lost their jobs while the price of food rose and continues to rise due to a supply and labor shortage. I see this as an opportune time for our great little state to move forward with universal free meals, both breakfast and lunch, in the coming years, regardless of the pupil weighting model, so that there's no gap between the current free meals being available to all students. If the goal of this task force is truly to achieve equity in this realm, I and the Abbey Group believe that universal school meals are the first key step in creating it. Again, I am imploring that the task force recommend our legislature the requirement of universal school meals in order to achieve equity among our students, regardless of pupil weighting. And again, regardless of that, I ask that this task force make the recommendation of the adoption of the statewide use of the household income form as the vehicle to collect necessary information for the implementation of this pupil weighting moving forward. And I thank you all again so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Frazier. Next is Allison Knott, and after Allison is Grant John Gorton. Hi, Ms. Knott, you may go
Hello.
ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Allison Knott. I'm a member of the Rutland City Board of School Commissioners and have served the city for several years. So today I had planned on focusing on providing the task force with some insight on the programs that are needed to support students with socioeconomic challenges. However, I first would like to address the fact that today is the last planned or announced opportunity for the public to address the task force, yet there is no known or shared implementation plan other than stripping out ELL weights and replacing with categorical aid. The task force has focused on carving out a subset of students and tossed around the idea the other weights are too much and education does not cost that much. The UVM Rutgers model, B1, is the best route to equitable educational outcomes. It has national data to support the weights. The task force creating other measures, mechanisms, and weights with no empiric evidence will not create equity. Without comparing the complete plan of all weights with full modeling and updated comparison to B1 simulation of the report, it is impossible to see the proposed impacts. How can I respond to a proposal that is not publicly available? I'm a clinical pharmacist and I have worked with data, study design, and reviews of such most of my life. If a medical study came out with incomplete data and a limited sample size, such as a one-year term in the middle of a pandemic, chances are it would not be published by any respectable journal. It would also, if it were pushed through and published, it would not survive peer review, and it would most certainly not warrant a change in medical practice. Yet here we are making decisions on education funding with extremely limited data. So now on to my task, as I had previously planned, is as far as the poverty weighting, the task force has discussed significantly dropping the factor. Does a university spend the same per student on a chemistry lecture of 300 students as it does for a clinical skills lab of 20? Is it reasonable that to support those 20 students may cost 3 times more per student than the lecture? If the institution did only support the lab at the same level as the lecture hall setting, ignoring the more specialized needs of the skills lab, do you think there would be the same outcome in the skills? How would those students perform if compared to students with supports of a state-of-the-art skills lab? You know, in looking at our funding and what we're asking for, I think it is important to think these questions thoroughly through as the impacts are very vast. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Knott. Next is Grant John Gorton, and after Mr. Gorton is Beth Rusnock. Mr. Gorton, are you there with us?
I am, and here's my video.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you. Go
Okay,
ahead.
you can hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I know a couple of you, Senator Hooker and Senator Brock, I know both know me. For the rest of you, I am John Gorton from Fairfield, Vermont. I'm a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. I'm retired from active duty in nuclear submarines and retired from providing engineering ship design work as a Department of Defense contractor. And I'm a semi-retired farmer. You never really retire from farming. We no longer milk cows, but have a diversified beef, hay, hemp CBD, custom fieldwork, and maple sugaring operation. I'm currently very active in social service work, including the Franklin Grand Isle Community Partnership, the Franklin Grand Isle Hunger Council, the Franklin County Food Shelf Alliance, the Franklin Grand Isle Building Bright Futures Council, and the Farm to Early Childhood Coalition. I'm a certified lay servant in the United Methodist Church, and along with several other volunteers, I run the Sheldon Methodist Church Food Shelf. We currently serve about 150 families, 400 people, distributing about 15,000 pounds of food monthly here in Franklin County. I'm here today to urge you to recommend the universal implementation of the household income form for data collection and to permanently implement universal free school meals for all children in all Vermont schools. I collaborate closely with Sheldon Elementary School on 2 initiatives to reduce food insecurity for school families and school children. I keep a shared refrigerator stocked so that students feeling hungry can access healthy snacks, and I provide a dedicated access time for school families to come to my food shelf promoted by the school staff. One of the barriers I face is the stigma associated with a family accessing a food shelf, and schools face that same stigma with families who, prior to the pandemic, had to fill out a school meal application form to apply for free and reduced meals. There's been concern that the universal free school meal program would result in undercounting low-income families because of not having that form. But that form would in fact have 3 significant benefits. It eliminates the stigma associated with filling out the school meal application form. It paves the way for implementation of universal free school meals, and it maximizes the completeness and accuracy of data used for school funding decisions. I know you've had lots of testimony, and the task force has done a lot of work about how you weigh and how you distribute funds. So complete and accurate data provided by that household income form is essential for providing fair and equitable education opportunity regardless of what distribution method you use. Student parents, teachers, and school administrators all agree that hungry students are poor learners, and making sure every student can eat every meal every day is a basic support in providing equity to all students. The focus of my organization is to ensure that families and children that we can reach have sufficient nutritious food. 25 years ago, I was an emergency food shelf. Now I'm the grocery store for 150 families in Franklin County. Having universal free school meals for all children would be an invaluable ally to me in that endeavor. I encourage you to recommend universal household income form and universal free school meals. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gorton. Next, we have Beth Rusnock, and after Ms. Rusnock is Joan Shannon. Hi, Ms. Rusnock. You may go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you for your time. I'm Beth Rusnock, Head of Community Relations for National Life Group and President of the National Life Group Foundation. We're very interested in the task force's work to ensure that all public school students have equitable access to educational opportunities. This is because in 2018, National Life adopted the cause to help end childhood hunger in Vermont. Why did we choose this cause? Since it's our business to protect children and families, it seemed like a natural extension. And it really hit home when one of our colleagues was volunteering to stuff backpacks filled with food for elementary schools in Barrie. A teacher thanked her for volunteering and shared that one of her 5-year-old students arrived that morning shaking because he was so hungry. All children should have access to universal meals. If a child arrives at school shaking because he's that hungry, his health is obviously compromised. He can't focus in class. The teacher needs to provide him the extra attention since he's distracted. He might be bullied for being the poor kid who needs the free or reduced lunch, which exacerbates his anxiety and then sends him to the school nurse. Is his educational experience the same as his friend who came to school with a healthy breakfast and lunch? Obviously not. One of the crumpled silver linings from the pandemic was the fact that all Vermont students have access to universal meals. We've heard how it eliminated stigma, how it changed the entire school culture for the better. However, now children are starting to ask if the food will be taken away. We cannot go backwards. The provision of universal meals in schools equalizes the opportunities for more than kids. It takes pressure off of parents and means teachers will not have to dig into their own pockets to provide healthy food to their hungry students. Universal meals don't just level the playing field for individual students, they lift the entire community. As one of the largest employers in this state and as the fastest growing life insurance company in the United States, National Life Group needs an educated workforce. We want to ensure all children have access to universal meals so they could grow into the healthy leaders our state and our company needs. We want healthy, thriving communities. This is not only a health issue, it's a workforce issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rusnock. Next, we have Joan Shannon, and after Joan is Abby Corse. Ms. Shannon, are you there?
I am here, just getting my video. Hi, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm City Councilor Joan Shannon from Burlington. I'm making my request to you as someone who has, to a degree, walked in your shoes, and I appreciate the difficulty of your task. I trust your commitment to student equity, that you all believe that our students across the state should have the same opportunities to achieve their goals. The recommendation by the scholars you trusted for this analysis is very clear. Quote, "The recommended weights represent the best available evidence about the cost differentials in educating Vermont students. The existing weights had weak at best connections to evidence about the additional costs of educating students with disparate learning needs," end quote. Please do not ignore this in favor of categorical aid. If you do not address the poverty weights, you will not address equity in the funding formula that you set out to address in the first place. Some communities, like my own, have been suffering from the inequity of these weights for more than 20 years. That means for more than 20 years, our poorest school districts have not been getting the funding needed to equitably educate students. We can't undo that, but we can at least right the ship at this point and sail on with everyone on board. When it comes to actual implementation, each of you has to be acutely aware of how such a change is going to affect your constituents. For many of you, it will cost your districts more or you will get less. For high poverty districts with the most need, we've been underfunded for decades. Burlington and Winooski and other high poverty communities across the state that are not represented on this committee are relying on you to fairly adjust the poverty weight as recommended. We're asking you to be champions and heroes for equity. Categorical aid does not solve the baseline problem of an inequitable funding formula, and it adds to the cost of Vermont's education system. Shortly after our legislature enacted Act 60 and the per pupil weighting system for the purpose of addressing school funding inequities across the state, the legislature also took up another tough issue, civil unions. In that action, many legislators recognized the importance of doing the right thing, even if it wasn't popular in their district. We could never have achieved marriage equality without those willing to stand up and face the consequences. History has judged them well. We are the brave little state, and I thank you for your service and commitment to serving all of us, and never forgetting our most vulnerable, even when it's hard. It is indisputable that the most impoverished districts in the state have been underfunded. It wasn't intentional, but now we know, and we can't afford any further delay in addressing this painful as it is. Please do not kick this can of worms down the road with a Band-Aid solution around the periphery of the issue. I beg you to be brave and have the courage to stand up for equity and avoid the temptation to find more palatable solutions by manipulating data. In Burlington, our schools are in crisis and our students rely on your decisions for their equity. Thank you for your time and commitment to this hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Shannon. Next, we have Abby Corse, and after Abby is Cynthia Browning. Hi, Ms. Corse, you may go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Abby Corse. I'm coming to you from Whitingham, Vermont. My kids attend Twin Valley Elementary and Middle School. I will admit that I am not as prepared for this testimony as I would like, having been working as hard as possible lately in my role as the Farm and Forest Sector representative to the Vermont Climate Council. Believe it or not, I do find there are parallels between your work here and the work being done within the Climate Council as we attempt to grapple with the complexities of moving our society forward into an equitable, resilient, and just future in the face of a changing climate. The very same schools, districts, communities, and pupils impacted by our inequitable and unjust formula also tend to overlap with the frontline and impacted communities as defined by the guiding principles created by the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Climate Council. As a bit of background, I'm a 6th-generation dairy farmer living and stewarding land in Whitingham, Vermont, unceded Abenaki homeland. I graduated from Whitingham's at that time K through 12 school, which has now been combined with Wilmington to create the Twin Valley schools where my children ages 11 and 7 now attend. I mentioned ties to climate earlier, and I'm wanting to draw that connection better. Simply put, the difference in greenhouse gas emissions from my childhood experience of attending a school within 2 miles of my home to transporting our children across multiple towns, as so many now do, adds up in our vehicle miles traveled. As any parent well knows, if you have an involved child, you're at the school potentially multiple times a day. That has a direct impact to our transportation sector emissions, which accounts for the bulk of Vermont's emissions profile. Community resilience will be utterly critical in the face of a changing climate as well. The combination of far-flung schools with dual parent working households is not a recipe for sustainable and resilient communities or children. It cannot be that the schools that overlap serving our frontline and impacted communities can be the least resourced. It cannot be that the people who bear the disproportionate impacts of climate change are the same who face inequitable education for their children and high property taxes. Our firm is a certified organic dairy shipping high quality milk to Organic Valley. We've been rotationally and regeneratively grazing animals since the 1960s. We consistently produce high quality milk from our thriving and biodiverse perennial pastures. It cannot be that in Vermont, of all places where we claim to treasure our natural and working lands, and in a moment when we so need them to sustain our shared future, that I have to choose between my farm and my children's educational opportunities. I cannot move this farm and I cannot make a living farming to afford me the privilege of shuttling them elsewhere. How can it be that in a state like Vermont that claims the reputation it does, that a zip code determines the quality of education a child receives? It is untenable. We need our communities of color, our farm worker communities, our low income and rural communities to have equitable access to educational opportunity. We need the resilience that a strong school system provides. I am imploring you from the very bottom of my heart to please fix the formula of the pupil waiting system so that funds can be accessed equitably throughout our state. We all benefit from strong and resilient communities. We must fix our formula. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corse. Next, we have Cynthia Browning, and after Cynthia is Ted Plemenos. Ms. Browning, are you there? Okay, excellent. Ms. Browning, are you there? Cynthia?
Hi, this is Cynthia.
Okay,
Hi.
great. You're up to go. If you can turn on your video, that would be great. If not, you may keep it off and you can proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. I'll leave the video off because of the internet connection issue, and sorry for the delay. I was listening hard to the previous panelist and I had my eyes closed to do that, and I didn't see the notices to join. I apologize.
You may go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity again. It is hard to comment today because your proposals are still in development. I've tried to follow the analysis that you've undertaken, and although I continue to feel very strongly that the per pupil weight has to be changed in the direction of the UVM Rutgers studies recommendation, I also can see there can be profound complications having to do with additive or multiplicative or the small schools grant, other factors that could actually lead to strained, unintended, and perhaps undesirable results. So I would be open to a kind of a hybrid approach in which the weights get moved in the direction of the study's recommendation, but then categorical grants are used to complete the adjustment and ensure that adequate resources are provided to provide equitable opportunity. However, it's very clear that the prospect of the way districts are pitted against each other, if you're currently overweighted or currently underweighted, distributional impacts could be quite severe. And I will say again what I said before, that I think that impact needs to be cushioned to avoid that kind of conflict. And I will say again what I've said before to this task force and to others who may not know it. There's $220 million worth of non-education programs covered through the education fund. This is current use at $48 million and the property tax credit at $183 million. The former is forestry and agriculture, The latter is a homeowner support system. These were paid for in the general fund before Act 60. The state should be reimbursing the education fund for the cost of those programs. That would be 22 cents on the property tax rate. Just partial reimbursement will go a long way, I expect, to cushion the impact of the distributional changes that are being proposed here. I urge you to look at this long-standing inequity, in addition to the inequity of the per pupil weight, the inequity that resources have been and continue to be taken from students and allocated to non-education programs in violation of what I see as the spirit of Act 60. So I would urge you to cushion the impact, and I would urge you to look at asking for state reimbursement of the cost of non-education programs in the education fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Browning. If you could submit your testimony via written form too, that would be helpful, because you were in and out a little bit in your connection. So that would be great if you could send in writing too. Next, we have Ted Plebanos, and after Ted is Mary Nethinger. Hi, Ted. Go ahead with your.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. My name is Ted Plebanos. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Rutland City Public Schools. Thank you for the opportunity to offer comments today. I have been following the deliberations of the task force and the work earlier this year by the 4 legislative committees who reviewed recommendations of the UVM Rutgers study. The work of this task force, and along with it, the educational opportunities for more than 85,000 Vermont students each year, are now at a key crossroads. I hope that the task force members will consider, and perhaps will reconsider, some of the directions and the decisions that have been described recently by task force members. I would encourage all task force members to do that in the context of 2 short but challenging questions. The first is, what end product does the task force wish to deliver? And the second is, what data and analysis are required to support and ensure such a deliverable, and that it is sound and free of unintended consequences? One task force member has stated that the scholars who participated in the UVM Rutgers study were asked a narrow question and gave a narrow answer. I believe it would be more accurate to say that the members of the study team were asked a well-focused and a well-defined set of questions, to which they provided a focused and well-defined and empirically based set of recommendations. I am concerned that the task force may believe that it has the responsibility and the wherewithal to undertake a less well-defined scope of work and to deliver a broader package of solutions. I'm concerned that this new work is being conducted by just a few analysts, and that much of it has remained inaccessible to the public, who is actually paying for that additional effort. I'm wondering why the task force, now several months into its work, and after being granted $25,000 by the legislature with which to engage consultant services, has yet to release an update of the UVM Rutgers simulations using more current actual data, as recommended and as requested. And I'm wondering about inconsistent messages that I've heard from a few different task force members about the path that is being followed. One task force member has reassuringly said recently that the task force will make publicly available the tables and spreadsheets before we make final decisions and vote. Another said, however, that tonight we will explain how we came to the decision that this would be a good way to go. That decision being to replace the UVM Rutgers weights for EEL with categorical aid. The task force has an opportunity, and many would say an obligation, to take a long overdue step toward equity for all Vermont students by implementing the recommendations of the UVM Rutgers study as proposed. And finally, the task force may wish to consider the sage advice offered by the late General and Secretary of State Colin Powell. Based upon his many decades of service to the country, Secretary Powell would refer to the pottery barn rule.
Thank
You
you.
break it, you own it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Mary Neffinger, and after Mary is Robert Bliss. Hi, Mary.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Mary Neffinger, and I'm a parent of 3 children in the Addison Northwest School District and a member of the ANWSD and MAUSD District Merger Committee. We've been discussing possible district mergers. Senator Hardy recently attended our most recent meeting and commended us for our forward thinking. I'm here today to share some of our preliminary findings in the hopes that this task force can help our committee and our school districts reach our goals. Firstly, according to our financial projections, and these are based on the old equalized pupil model, the cost savings from our merger would result in our school district being able to function below the per pupil threshold for only 5 years. This is an improvement of our projections without a merger breaching the per pupil threshold in 2 or 3 years. Secondly, ANWSD was one of the first districts to merge under Act 46. This merger discussion comes after having cut our budget every single year in an effort to contain costs and maintain programming in our district, which you heard from John Stroup. Thirdly, we've not limited our discussion to just the schools. Our committee is looking into ways that our communities can support more affordable housing options, thereby bringing young families with more school-aged children into our district. However, these changes will not help us in time. I'd like to assure all members of this task force that our merger committee is not the result of forward thinking. This is our last Hail Mary pass in order to delay ballooning tax rate increases. If our committee decides that the short-term financial projections and tax savings are worth it and merging is the best path forward, there's no guarantee that we'll get our communities on board in the short time frame we are tasked with negotiating. Though we've started to share resources in small ways like athletics and our food service program, our community has very strong feelings about what another level of loss of local control might mean for our towns. And even if we are successful in convincing our communities to make that sacrifice, we'll still be out of money in 5 short years. The proposed pupil weighting study is bad for Addison County schools. We are rural, but we don't average above any of the thresholds. We're small, but not small enough. We have low income and ELL students, but we do not have enough to figure positively into your formula at the district level. We do not have the large school district's ability to use economies of scale. While ELLs, low income, and rural community support may seem like the key focuses in the weighting study, there doesn't appear to be a calculus for determining when large districts should be able to use their size to need less per pupil than medium and small districts. I urge you to look at our financial projections and see that districts like ours are quickly running out of options. The current equalized student pupil formulas will be devastating to our district and make our community's goals of equity of education unreachable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Neffinger. Next we have Robert Bliss, and after Mr. Bliss is Tori Cleland.
Greetings. My name is Robert Bliss. I reside, vote, and pay taxes in Rutland City. I also serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Schools for Rutland City Public Schools. I thank you for the service on this task force and for welcoming me a second time to discuss the needed solution to Vermont's inequitable system of weighting student needs. The results of the recommendations of the weighting study are unmistakable. There's no need to review them here. It suffices to say a bright light has been cast on Vermont's education funding formulas that are creating a widening gap between underweighted and overweighted communities. More than 2 decades ago, the Brigham Decision Court noted, even if we are to assume that the foundation plan, the funding formula at the time, is working adequately to accomplish its purpose, we must confront the constitutionality of the system in light of the limited nature of the foundation's plan purpose. The object of the plan is not equality of educational opportunity generally, or even equality of local capacity to facilitate opportunity. It's only to equalize capacity to produce a minimally adequate education system. I would argue that, to me, the current funding situation and the proposed categorical aid would accomplish a minimally adequate education, and it certainly would not engage and enrich all of our students. The problems associated with political decisions like categorical aid are just that, political. Those who serve Vermont citizens now and in the future are subject to political pressure, lobbying, and the impact of the zip code in decision-making. The empirical and neutral study that yielded the recommendations you are all considering was focused on what's best for Vermont's students. To shine a bright light on the impact of poverty and what goes on in cities like Rutland, last Friday, a helicopter with a bright spotlight hovered over our Northwest neighborhood, less than 2 blocks from Northwest Primary School, where 3 agencies and the Sheriff's Department, including the feds, were busy conducting a raid into one of our communities and 2 houses that included drug distribution and human trafficking. Every member of that small neighborhood and this entire community was traumatized, period. I went to a meeting of that group on Wednesday night and met parents and children and community leaders who were there just to try to support that community. The impact of poverty in Rutland and cities like it across Vermont is unmistakable. And I would encourage you to have a conversation with any teacher, educator, or staff member that works in any one of those schools to understand the impact of poverty, ELL, and the increased needs of special education in our state. As stated above, I want to thank you for your service. And I please support the full implementation of the UVM Rutgers weighting study. It's the correct action to take for our students on Baxter Street in Rutland and also across the state. It is the equitable and correct thing to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bliss. Next, we have Tori Cleland, and after Tori is Floyd Davison.
Hello, I am Tori Cleland, and I am the school board chair for Winooski School District. Thank you for your time and your work on this important task force. My first question after listening to my community members in Vermont is, why are you going rogue with the lives of our Vermont children? You have all the information you need. You've had it since June. You have heard so many intelligent, dedicated, and caring Vermonters throughout this state whose concerns mirror the data in the report by experts for how the distribution of funding currently is inequitable to students and families in many towns and cities and not in others, and it causes great harm. Shout outs to Kathy Olwell, David Kelly, Ted. Wow, there's so much collective wisdom in Vermont right now. I am so inspired by all the speakers I've been able to hear thus far. And so far, I haven't heard anyone support your homemade formula. Our kids matter. Systems want to replicate themselves, and you will do so by going rogue, by trying to create models or your formulas that you haven't done modeling first. So proposals without doing the modeling first lacks integrity and foresight and equity, and you have a scientific study in your possession. The testimony today is clear and strong for the implementation plan for the scientifically derived weights recommended by UVM and Rutgers. This is simple. It really is. Thus far, the actions of this task force, it essentially seems like you're questioning the intentions of the communities and the educational experts we hire to run schools to use the taxing capacity to meet the needs of our families and students. The actions and words of this task force demonstrate that the task force feels that you know better than communities, families, professionals, and education. You are questioning the integrity of our collective communities. Are you questioning and reflecting on yourselves? In Winooski, our district has 62% of our student population live in poverty. 60% of our population are Black and brown bodies who are intelligent and bright and brilliant. And the way this formula works right now does not honor them at all. 33% of our students are multilingual learners and 27% of us qualify for student education. Right now, with the inaccurate rates, it means that Winooski has the second highest spending per student and the highest tax rate in Chittenden County, and that is absurd. This undue tax burden impacts the most vulnerable and low-income families in this county. And realistically, the current economic infrastructure is working according to design. That is a phrase by Yoma Ulu to say that the systemic racism and oppression in this financial structure and system is causing great harm. And if you do not disrupt it,
thank you for your testimony.
Continue. Please be courageous. Please listen to these amazing Vermonters that live in this state and do.
Next, we have Floyd Davison. Mr. Davison, are you there?
I am, thank you. Good morning, my name is Floyd Davison. I'm the business manager for the Mount Abraham Unified School District, encompassing 5 towns of Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, New Haven, and Moncton here in Addison County. I'm also a resident of Bristol. Thank you for the opportunity to share our concerns relative to the impact to our 5 towns of implementing a revision to the current weighting formulas. Our district leadership team supports this change to realign the weighting formulas to allow better allocation of resources to our highest need students. We see the benefits of resetting the weights from a statewide basis. Our district, like most, is faced with declining enrollment and costs continuing to increase. We have scrubbed our budget in the attempt to find all available savings. We are now exploring other possible solutions to gain efficiency. And this has led us to discussing repurposing schools, closing schools, and merging with a neighboring district. This uncertainty has led to one of our towns petitioning and then voting to leave our district. Understanding that any implementation structure is uncertain, we've used a scenario looking at the impact on our students as if fully implemented in fiscal year 23. Again, fully recognizing how unlikely this is. And the impact will be the same at whatever time the implementation does happen. Our current projections for fiscal 23 suggest a drop of 35 equalized pupils. This decrease, coupled with a 1.1% increase, only a 1.1% increase in top-line spending, generates a 4.76% increase in our projected per pupil spending. In our district, the weighting formula in previous modeling drove our equalized pupil down by another 7% using a middle-of-the-road model. This is projected as a further reduction of 90 more equalized pupils. The impact to the fiscal year 23 budget of an additional 90 reduction with that same 1.1% top-line expenditure increase would drive the per pupil to a 12% increase. The impact to our taxpayers in this scenario will be dramatic, and it will not be the reality. Our voters have shown that an increase of this magnitude is unlikely to pass a 5-town vote. When we last submitted a budget that reflected an 8% increase in per pupil spending, it was passed by 13 votes. Last year, a budget reflecting a decrease in per pupil spending was declined by 35% of our community. With this, we recognize that what will happen is a further reduction in spending and the resulting additional reductions of supports to our students. Some will say, just cut the fluff. The declining enrollment of the past 5 years have already driven those cuts. We're now reducing services that our students need. We ask that implementation be gentle and thoughtful. Further, using the reduced and the free and reduced as the driver has flaws that will need some action. We struggle to get families to complete an accurate and acceptable form to access free meals, a direct benefit to them. We do not expect we will have more success in our attempts to gather these applications.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Thank you for your testimony. You may submit the full thing in writing if you'd like. Next, we have Dan MacArthur. I'm sorry I didn't give you a heads up, Dan. And after Dan is Rob Backlund. Hi, Mr. MacArthur. You may go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Dan MacArthur. I'm a school board member in Marlborough, also a voting member of the Wyndham Central Supervisory Union Board, also one of 2 regional representatives from Wyndham to the Vermont School Boards Association Board. So I speak today not only on behalf of the children of Marlborough, but of this entire region, from Whitingham to Londonderry, Bellows Falls, Brattleboro. Many of the districts in this region are greatly rural. Many of them have poverty levels well above the state average. It is my fervent hope that we can come up with a weighting formula that provides educational opportunities and local educational property tax rates, which are equitable throughout the state. I don't believe that an informed decision on weighting formulas can possibly be reached unless we all have access to modeling showing the local impact of all of the various options, including the weighting formulas as recommended by the UVM Rutgers Commission using current district spending numbers. Without access to all of these numbers, there is a lack of transparency which clouds the public's view of the work of your task force. Why not make all of the information available so a truly informed decision can be made? The final decision as to what gets implemented will be made by the legislature, and I will be lobbying my legislators hard to make sure that what they implement is the one that provides the best measure of equity throughout the state. Thanks to you all for your work on this task force, and a special thanks to Senator Hardy and Representative Kornheiser for a letter which I received yesterday, maybe the day before, explaining what is going on with the task force and the difficulties of getting modeling. So I appreciate the two of you, especially your openness and transparency as of this communication. There's a comment in this letter that gives me hope that the authors of the UVM Rutgers report are being included in the work of this task force. And I would like clarification of this, please. Let me quote from the letter, in quotes, coordinating remote work sessions between AOE, JFO, and the report authors has been difficult. So that was specifically stated. And does this mean that the authors of the original report and their recommendations are part of the ongoing discussion, and that their original recommendations will be included in the updated modeling, and that they will be in agreement as to the final recommendation of this task force? This would, I believe, go a long way toward ensuring that the task force work has credibility with the public and before the legislature. Thank you again for your work, and I am so proud to be part of Vermont's educational community today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. MacArthur. Mr. Backlund, Rob Backlund is next, and after Mr. Backlund is Scott Fay. Mr. Backlund, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Are you able to turn your video on or not?
There we are. Sorry about that.
You're fine. Go ahead.
My name is Rob Backlund. I live in Lincoln, Vermont, and I represent Lincoln on the Mount Abe Unified School District Board, which sort of encompasses northeastern Addison County. Disclaimer, I'm not representing our board. I'm speaking only on behalf of myself today. I've got two comments that I'd like to propose to the committee. The first being that I really hope that there is some form of assessment of how a new weighting formula is working for the state of Vermont and its students. And I say that in two ways. I think there needs to be assessment of if there's spending equity as school districts possibly end up with more equalized pupils or districts end up with less equalized pupils, that there needs to be some sort of accountability that school districts that have the opportunity to possibly raise their per pupil spending are taking advantage of that. And then I also realize that, in regards to intent, in regards to feelings or symbolizing of changing the weighting formula, we really need to measure is this producing better outcomes for all of our students across the state of Vermont. And I hope that assessment occurs, if not annually, biannually, to make sure that whatever comes out of this committee and was put forth, that our students across the board are having improvements in their outcomes. And my second piece is, as we all know and we see in the news every day, our kids, our teachers, and our schools are struggling in year two of a pandemic. And, for our youngest learners, those who started school in a pandemic, they're already behind. Their trajectory in education is already behind. And socioeconomics aside, that could mean a lower quality and quantity of life based off of this. And so as a father of a 2-year-old whose daughter will hopefully start kindergarten in a post-pandemic world, I realize she'll have peers in that building that started their educational journey in a COVID setting. And I asked that the committee considered a COVID weight for all current students whose educational journeys were affected by this pandemic, that we realize that they need extra support, that our schools need extra support. And I think one way that you could do that is by saying those folks who went to school having to deal with masks, social distancing 2 days a week in person, that they're valued a little bit more so we get them back on track to a better educational experience. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Buckland. Next up, we have Scott Fay, and after Mr. Fay is Tom Flanagan. Hi, Mr. Fay, you can go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for listening. My name is Scott Fay. I manage the school nutrition program for the Essex Westford School District. I'm the current president of the School Nutrition Association of Vermont, and I live in Essex Junction. I'm here to ask you for 2 recommendations. First, please recommend to the legislature to require universal school meals to level the playing field for students, regardless of how you decide to do the weighting. Secondly, please recommend the statewide use of the household income form to collect the information needed for the weighting, regardless of how the weights are calculated. This work of determining the weighting formulation is so much more meaningful when students are receiving the nourishment they need to succeed at school. Since USDA's COVID waivers have been in place, our meal participation has increased by 67%. That is very clearly telling us that more students are choosing to eat school food. We know that when more students eat school meals, meal service lines are normalized and the school lunch stigma is forced to give ground, and students are fed with a level of dignity that's eluded us up to this point. It's not just identified students that are eating, it's literally the majority of students. We're seeing upwards of 75 to 80% of our students eating school meals. It's been 18 months of operating under these waivers, and our program is already visibly better with easily identifiable improvement in the quality and service of our ingredients. We've been able to completely lean into a top quality meal program and do away with a la carte sales like snacks and drinks that are available only to those students who have cash in hand or money in their account. Historically, districts have developed robust a la carte programs to raise revenues and balance the budget, which consequently fuels the lunch stigma. Now with universal meals, we've closed our snack bars and eliminated a la carte sales. We are finally able to focus our energy and resources on providing the best possible school meal program. We need more time to collect and analyze the data, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that a large portion of our 67% increase is coming from identified students that are now choosing to eat at school simply because the stigma is in full retreat. The bottom line, with a level playing field, more students are receiving the nutrition they need, so they are fed, focused, and ready to learn. Once again, regardless of how you decide to do the weighting, please recommend to the legislature to require universal meals to level the playing field for students and bring dignity into our school cafeterias. And please recommend the statewide use of the household income form to collect the information needed for the weighting. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fay. Next, we have Tom Flanagan, and after Mr. Flanagan is Nathan Lavery. Hi, Mr. Flanagan, you can go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for your time and hard work on this important issue. I'm Tom Flanagan, Superintendent of the Burlington School District. A few months ago, I testified alongside Winooski Superintendent Sean McMahon, both of us in favor of implementing the weighted pupil recommendations put forth in the study completed by the American Institute of Research, Rutgers University, and the University of Vermont. At that time, I shared 3 major concerns. The current system is inequitable and categorical aid would create further inequities. I also explained my concern that categorical aid would be unpredictable and would be difficult to administer. After reading the current proposal, it seems clear that you have tried hard to ensure this funding is secure and that some of the administrative burdens will be lifted. I appreciate this work. I also know and believe you are working to create a system that is equitable. However, I am concerned that the direction of the task force recommendation may further inequities in Vermont. I also know equity is a hard word that gets used a lot by many different people, referencing many different things, and that the idea of equity can be unclear. So I want to clarify that when I am talking about equity in the funding formula, I am talking about fair funding that considers the real needs of districts. And the risk is that a funding formula that doesn't do this creates and furthers structural racism. I believe that you want to address this problem, but I worry that we will unintentionally uphold structural racism in Vermont if we don't take bold action. In order to address this possibility, I believe it is critically important that we implement the weighted formula from the study, or that we compare the model the task force is proposing to the weighted study conducted by the University of Vermont, Rutgers University, and the American Institute of Research using comparable and current data. Without this comparison, we will not be able to make an objective decision. And this is a big decision that will impact the lives of our children for the next generation. So we should take the time to make sure we get it right. Some of you may believe that this will take too much time. In their book, Dismantling Racism, a workbook on social change groups, Kenneth Jones and Tima Oken describe a sense of urgency as one symptom of systemic racism. Operating in this way makes it difficult to take time to be inclusive, encourage democratic and/or thoughtful decision-making, to think long-term, and to create and to consider consequences. The great basketball coach John Wooden said, if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over? We need to get this right. Leading for equity is hard, but Vermonters are counting on you. Please adopt the recommendations for the weighted study or compare the two models and share the results with us so that the decisions we are making and the impacts of those decisions are clear to us all. Thank you so much for your work, and I appreciate your consideration of my testimony today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan. Next is Nathan Lavery, and after Mr. Lavery is Carol Kent. Okay. Okay, Carol Kent, we're going to move to you while we're trying to get Mr. Lavery into the room. Carol Kent, are you there? Okay. Okay. We'll go back to Nathan Lavery first, and then Carol. I'm sorry for the confusion. We are having technical difficulties. So, Mr. Lavery, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Teresa. Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Lavery, and I'm the Executive Director of Finance and Operations for the Burlington School District. My understanding is that the analysis of the categorical aid proposal is delayed, but my hope is that this analysis compares the categorical aid proposal to the impact of the recommended weights. We all need this analysis, I think, for the clarity to truly understand whether or not the categorical aid proposal sufficiently addresses the longstanding inequities in our funding model. In Burlington, we've done some preliminary analysis that suggests that the categorical aid proposal perpetuates the existing inequities in Vermont's funding model. Fortunately, the legislature had the wisdom to commission an analysis of the equalized pupil weights, and we know to the best of our ability what equity and equitable weights look like. So it would take an especially compelling argument to depart from the study's recommendations, given that doing so likely means allowing historically advantaged taxpayers to retain their advantages on the backs of students in underweighted districts. We don't need to perpetuate this inequity any longer. We just need your courage and leadership to enact the recommendations from the weighting study. So thank you very much for your time, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lavery. Next is Carol Kent, and after Carol is Moreau Weinberger.
Great. Thank you very much for taking my testimony today. My name is Carol Kent, and I'm the School Nutrition Director for Lamoille North School District. I am past president of the School Nutrition Association of Vermont, and I live in Huntington, Vermont. Like my colleagues before, I am here to ask this task force to strongly recommend to the legislature to require universal school meals that would eliminate stigma and ensure that all students have equal access to school meals and the daily nutrition that they need to be successful. Also, I ask that you please recommend the statewide use of the household income form to collect the data needed for the weighting of pupils, regardless of how that happens. Universal school meals and household income forms are the best tools we have to eliminate stigma, shame, and hunger in schools, and to inclusively collect valuable financial data while feeding all children. We have been witnessing the clear benefits of the universal school meal since the beginning of the pandemic. The stigma is gone, anxiety is gone, shame is gone in our cafeterias. We've heard the responses from educators across the state. Universal school meals creates equitable opportunities for learning. A universal household income form gathers needed data without imposing humiliation and shame on a segment of our families who are already doing their best to provide for their children. If I may read this statement from a teacher. It has been amazing to have free meals for all students. Neither the children nor I have to worry about whether or not they are supposed to get food from school and whether their families will receive an unexpected bill if kids do take food. Just that one worry about getting a bill creates stress for students, and it's very sad to see little kids feeling like they can't eat because their parents tell them that they can't afford it. Being able to offer breakfast and lunch to any child who wants it this year has alleviated that worry. It's no longer low SES, free and reduced kids and others when it comes to food. If they are hungry, they eat without worry or stigma, and that's how it should be. As school nutrition administrators, we know that the current meals application system is flawed, and the potential for a more just and fair system is within our reach. I'm really grateful for your dedication to creating an equitable learning opportunity for all students and for recognizing that successful learning begins with universal school meals. Thank you so much for your time and your work.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. Next, we have Moreau Weinberger, and after Moreau is Zach McLaughlin. Mr. Weinberger, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, but you're on your side. Are you?
All right, let's try that. How about that?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know why it didn't pivot, but we'll go this way. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts. I'm Moreau Weinberger, the mayor of Burlington, father of 2 children who are in the Burlington public school system. I'm a product of Vermont Public Schools as well. I am testifying today to reinforce the messages from the Burlington and Winooski superintendents and other members of our community to urge you to fully implement the recommendations of the pupil weighting factors report. Further, I understand that you are considering an alternative to that, the formula laid out there, and I would urge that if that is going to be considered, that an equally robust analysis of the impacts on all Vermont communities be part of the public record, and that it's got to be some comparable piece of work to the public, the pupil weighting factors, if we're going to get that right. Vermont and Burlington leaders have committed to making our communities more equitable and just. Our state constitution requires education funding to be equitable. These goals and responsibilities cannot be met without correcting the pupil weighting formula in disparities. Burlington students and students from other low-income and rural communities deserve an equal education to children in other wealthier Vermont school districts. Equitable funding of school districts in Vermont is long overdue. Burlington and Winooski have the highest percentage of English language learners in the state and a high percentage of students who are growing up in low-income households. Correcting the pupil weighting formula will give our school district the necessary resources to support these students. Supporting these English language learners is essential to allowing every student the opportunity to thrive and become successful contributing members of our community. And then finally, I would like, and I know I made this point to you previously, as a municipal official, I think the point needs to be made that trying to address this issue by simply creating new categorical aid, as I believe is being considered, is one that will put further pressures on the education fund and continue what has been, I think, an unsustainable trend in Vermont over recent decades of ed fund spending crowding out all other municipal priorities. In Burlington, the percentage of property taxes funding municipal services has dropped from approximately 40% 15 years ago to just 30% now. And if this issue is solved through the categorical aid, I'm really concerned that it's just going to continue to accelerate this already very problematic trend. Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in again, and thank you for the work you're doing. I know it, from what I understand of this, it's an extraordinarily challenging undertaking, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you very much. Mr. McLaughlin, you are our last witness.
Great. Well, we'll see if we can bring this home. Good afternoon. My name is McLaughlin. I'm the superintendent of schools in Springfield School District. I think most of you are familiar with our history as a community. We were once the economic hub of Vermont, and then went through some very challenging times, and we've had to kind of claw our way back. And we're at a unique point in the history of our community where the municipal government, school officials, and nonprofits are all pulling in the same direction. But we have an issue that we need to have addressed in order to get over that tipping point, and that is the tax capacity for our schools. So if we want schools to be what we need them to be as we revitalize. We have students who are locked in cycles of poverty, and we have a system that's been underfunded for decades. When I was at an initial proposal of Professor Colby to talk about the study, I remember someone asking Bill Mathis, how did we originally come up with the weights? And Bill went like this. The room laughed, but I hoped in the moment, as Professor Colby talked about the work, that the decade of well-meaning legislative actions that I've been having to deal with as a district administrator that didn't understand the ripple effects, that this was an opportunity to do something different, and that this was going to be well thought out, researched, and this was going to be this would be a real opportunity to change the fundamental nature of schooling in Vermont and would affect my community. We now have the empirical work to live up to Brigham in a real way. And regardless of whether students are trapped in rurality, poverty, or are other language speakers, we have the opportunity to fully implement this study in a way that's going to help all those kids. If you are thinking about leaving that roadmap, I think it is absolutely essential that you are able to fully think out the ripple effects of any additional choices you make outside of the study. We need to, and I think the legislature agrees, we need to make sure that we are serving traditionally underserved students. And you've been given a roadmap to do that. So if you start to move in a different direction, I think it is absolutely essential that we see that modeling so that we can understand in a deep way whether or not that ripple effect does things that you don't anticipate. And so I would encourage you, I look forward to seeing the modeling and the simulations. The question will be, once we see that modeling, can you definitively say moving away from the UVM study does a better job of serving those students? And if you can't, I encourage you to fully implement the study and carry out the expectations of Vermonters for what we think we need for our youth. And I appreciate all your work. I know it's hard work, and I look forward to the future conversation around that study.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. And that completes the public testimony that we had lined up today, unless there's anyone else in the waiting room. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone who came and testified for your testimony, and anyone may submit their testimony in writing if they also would like to. And I think we're just a tiny bit ahead of schedule, so we're going to take about